Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another live episode of SumerDaily. Today, I am joined by my friend of the Stats and Scheme podcast, Tej Seth, and we're going to be breaking down the college football playoff. We're doing it a little earlier because the 8:45 game was canceled and will be played tomorrow afternoon. But we had some pretty fascinating games, Tej. These were the two games that I think one was kind of a David versus Goliath, and that one was really close in Texas and Arizona State. And then we had a really good matchup between Oregon and Ohio State, and Ohio State just kind of ran through Oregon. But first off, dude, how you doing? Fresh off the vacation, fresh off the holidays? How you doing, brother?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me back on. I was really excited for this. Obviously, I'm hoping that everyone in New Orleans is okay after that situation. And I'm glad that we had these games today to be able to talk about because it was a lot of fun to watch football today for sure.
And it was some good games. I think the first one, it looked like Texas was going to run away, and frankly, until this week, I thought Texas was probably the most well executed, like for the talent that they have. They executed the best throughout this year, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. But Ohio State just came out and absolutely floored Oregon. So let's get into haters and appreciators. Haters, Tej, I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I think the reason that Oregon lost was because their helmets did not match the rest of their uniform. They come out with the chrome helmets, similar color as Ohio State. Not a ton of difference there. What's Nike doing, Tej?
I actually agree with you. Like the uniform jerseys itself were fantastic. Like those are some of the best jerseys in all of college football. The helmets, you're right, like did not match the jerseys. Like they could have gone with like the green jersey with with the yellow O on the side, or even like those throwback ones they have where it's like the full yellow helmet with like the green
Right.
OU on the side, which always looked good. And I still, to this day, I still think Oregon lost the national title to Auburn because their jerseys were so ugly in that game. And they were known for wearing really nice jerseys at this time, especially. And if they just wore better jerseys in that game, they would have won.
Deion Sanders always said, you look good, you play good. They weren't looking good today, and they certainly
Yeah.
did not play good either. What happened to them? I talked with Quinn McLean about this midweek, and there were a couple avenues for this to not be a close game. And we'll get into, appreciating Jeremiah Smith and all the talent on that Ohio State team. But it seemed like, in particular, the use of motion by Chip Kelly really destroyed that Oregon defense. What did you see in the game that led to the downfall of the Oregon Ducks?
Yeah, I do think on that side of the ball, it was the motion from Chip Kelly, and it was everything you do to scheme up an explosive passing game where you had play action to dial up some deep shots. You had Jeremiah Smith, who is one of the best receivers in the country already at his age, if not the best receiver, being able to split the safeties on zone, really able to use his speed to get down the field. And then they were also using him on a lot of sideline catches because they know how good his body control is in that situation. And Oregon does have some good pieces all over their roster, but I think a weakness you could point to on this team was their corner play, where they probably wanted a little bit more out of Jabari Muhammad. After he transferred from Washington to Oregon, had an up and down year. Some of their other defensive backs were very similar, and we really saw Jeremiah Smith just take advantage of that on that side of the ball. And then when Oregon was on offense, because of how often Ohio State was getting pressure and Gabriel just having less answers to pressure than
Right.
other elite college quarterbacks, like you could really see that was just affecting him a lot throughout the game. He took a lot of sacks, wasn't able to get passes off down the field when pressured, and that really messed with Oregon's offense.
I thought the anomaly from the first game was the fact that they were so effective in targeting Denzel Ward and so effective in the passing game. I thought that was going to be the difference in this game. If they were able to recreate it, I thought they were going to be able to compete. And I kind of believed that, as you mentioned, Jack Sawyer and that defensive line was going to be able to get after Dylan Gabriel. I like Dylan Gabriel. I think he's a good quarterback. I'm interested to break down his film, with an eye towards the draft rather than back when I was watching him at UCF to play against or prepping for this game to cover it. But it seemed like the Ohio State defense was just at a different level of talent. And whether that's in the secondary, when they got, a couple of big plays there, whether that was the pressure, I totally agree. I thought that was the difference. Let's focus in on Jeremiah Smith. Let's appreciate Jeremiah Smith a little bit more. He is shaping up to be one of the greatest wide receiver prospects I think we've ever had. I think Julio Jones and Calvin Johnson are probably the two in recent history where it was like these two guys are an absolute lock to be good in the pros. Jeremiah Smith certainly looks like that's the case. There's been a lot of discussion of whether he would be the number one pick in this draft as a 18, 19-year-old. What do you think about that, Tej?
I definitely think he would be in play for the number one pick in this draft because he is already just an insane receiver as a freshman. And there were mumblings about him throughout the summer when Ohio State was in their camp period where like people started to talk about this freshman receiver they had that was making insane plays and was ahead of all these other receivers that Ohio State has put out into the NFL, Jackson Smith, the Jigba, Marvin Harrison Jr. Like they were saying that Jeremiah Smith was already ahead of them at his age. And we've seen that since the first game of the season this year, where he has just been a machine for this offense, where in this game, he had 9 targets, caught 6 of them for 144 yards and a touchdown. He had 9.1 total EPA when targeted, and added 17 points of win probability, according to GameOnPaper.com. So just an insane game from him where, if he was in the draft this year, I'm sure he would be in the conversation for the number one pick.
The thing that's so interesting with him is I think you look at the player and you think this is perhaps the truest X guy, a guy that you can just put out on an island and he can dominate one-on-one matchups or dominate when there is safety help. But his ability to really play in the slot as well, run the whole route tree, and also contribute a little bit in the running game, I think is the difference between, some of these wide receivers of yore and Jeremiah Smith. It's absolutely fantastic to see what he can do. It's going to be very interesting to see how the next 2 years go for him. It's really interesting that the NFL, and I didn't realize that this was actually part of the collective bargaining agreement, has it to where, you have to play 3 years in college. I think can you think of any other guys that could have I guess Trevor Lawrence was the last one that would have been in a similar position as Jeremiah Smith?
Yeah, I mean, Trevor Lawrence, based on his freshman year, definitely would have been in that situation. Yeah, I mean, that's what I think is like so impressive about this class itself. Is like you just have so many guys that are playing well as freshmen that still have to play in college. Where like they would definitely be NFL ready at this point, but just because of the rules, like they have to play a couple more years in college. So like there's definitely going to be a shift, in that 2027 draft, where just like how much talent is about to enter the league because of that.
Certainly. It's a toss up of whether I like the rule, because I think the two biggest college sports right now are women's basketball and, college football. And I think a big part of that is because people get to watch Jeremiah Smith absolutely dominate playoff games this year, and they're going to be able to watch him 2 more years. Same thing with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese in the past years in the women's basketball game. But it does suck as lovers of the NFL as well, that we can't see him go up against the tippy top talent in football. Speaking about the rules, Tej, the playoff format kind of ended up being a little bit tricky. I think the Arizona State-Texas game ended up well, which we'll get into here in a second. Ohio State and Oregon, a great matchup. Notre Dame's matchup tomorrow, of course, also very good. But the Boise State game was a little weird. Penn State definitely had a talent advantage there. Boise State was technically the home team. They get a bye. How would you change the playoff rules moving forward?
Yeah, so I think like the easy solution would be, they have spots for 4 or 5 conference champions in the playoffs, so like they get automatic bids. As long as you're a top 5 team that's a conference champion. But I wouldn't give the 3 and the 4 seed buys, just because there's really 2 really strong conferences in the Big Ten, and as you see, there's a massive drop off. And then there's the rest of the country right there. So, I really think it should have been, some version of, Oregon, Georgia as the 1-2 seeds as they won their conference title. But then also like Texas and Penn State should have been in the 3-4 seed spots, and then we could have just like seeded on from there. Like even though those aren't teams that won conference championships, like they still deserve to be in that by format. That way it would have just spread out the matchups a little bit.
Right.
My friend Michael Eagle also had a really good suggestion that he put out there on Twitter of where if you were to reseed all teams once they reach the quarterfinals, you could also spread out the distribution a little bit of just like probability to make the championship there as well.
I think that particularly looking at the Big 12, people were really hesitant on this Arizona State team, and the fact that Texas was having to win a game to get to play Arizona State obviously is a little bit weird given Texas's dominance against pretty much every team other than Georgia that they played. But Arizona State was able to hang in this game. I think it's a huge shout out to their young coach, and also a huge shout out to Cam Skattebo, who was absolutely fantastic. Do you think that Texas is, letting Arizona State get back into this game is a major question mark as they go on to now face Ohio State? Or do you think this was kind of a one-off thing where they kind of let their foot off the gas?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's a good point to bring up, and this is the very worrisome game for Texas, where you come into this game with arguably the best defense in the country, whether it was them or Notre Dame, and you allow Arizona State, who you have a massive talent advantage over, to have a pretty good day on offense, especially in that second half when their comeback was happening. And with Cam Skattebo and how well he played this year, like we all knew Arizona State wanted to run the ball, wanted to give the ball to him. So for Arizona State to have a 75th percentile EPA per rush performance, I do think is a little bit worrying for Texas defense, especially with them having to play against Judkins and Henderson in their next playoff game.
Certainly. And Oregon's weakness, I think, was their running defense anyway. TreVeyon Henderson went for 8 carries, 94 yards, 2 touchdowns. Judkins 17 for 85. They absolutely toasted Oregon on the ground as well as through the air and really in the whole game. It's going to be a really interesting matchup because the weakness of this Ohio State team has looked like their offensive line throughout the year. We saw Michigan be able to really take advantage of that in the game last week of the regular season. I'm really interested in what that Texas defensive line can do to that to the Ohio State offensive line moving forward, especially given that they, as you mentioned, were, I wouldn't call it dominated, but Skattebo was able to get out there and really get his rocks up. One of the all-time games for Cam Skattebo, do you think?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it was such an impressive performance, with how he was able to continue just like getting yards after contact in this game where like Texas's run fits weren't like terrible. Like they weren't great, but like they were definitely getting themselves in the right position to tackle Cam Skattebo, but like he was just making so many guys miss or moving the pile afterward, or even like the play where he got stopped at the 2-yard line and the offensive lineman kind of just like suplexed him into the end zone. That was an amazing moment of this game.
Quinn McLean, as I mentioned, you can go back and check out our preview podcast on the SumerDaily feed. He mentioned that if there was a point in which he started getting active in the passing game, he thought that Texas may have problems with that. It was very interesting because he was not super active in the passing game at the beginning of the game. And then as he started getting in, it gave ASU some life, and all of a sudden they were back in. We mentioned Jeremiah Smith in the draft. I'm really interested in what this run for Skattebo is going to do to his draft prospects. In my mind, he just seems like he's going to end up on the Chiefs. I don't know why. Like his style of play, kind of that success rate running, not really going to like nail any big plays because he's not the fastest guy on earth. But he feels like a player like that. When you're evaluating some of these running backs, Tej, what are you looking at to get a sense of if they can actually be a good NFL running back, especially as we saw, Ashton Jeanty also have a little bit of a muted game to his standards, not putting up 200, 250 yards, but there was a lot of good stuff to like, even though there wasn't the big plays.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at running backs, college to pro, There's two main things I really like to look at. One of them is just explosive run rate. That's something that I've researched before that transfers over really well from college to pro. Is just like how well you are able to break off 15 plus yard carries. And then the other thing is missed tackle force rate. And so, like, if you're consistently forcing missed tackles at the college level, it's usually stable and predictive of how well you're going to do at the NFL level. So those are usually the two in-game things I'm looking at. And then when you look at like a running back's profile as a whole, weight really matters for running backs. Like, I think that's one of the more under discussed things is like there's a decently strong correlation between weight and your yards per season as a running back. Like it's very hard to be a high end NFL running back at under 200 pounds or under 190 pounds. So that's something I'll usually look at as well with respect to when they go to the combine.
The most interesting part I think of Genty is we've seen guys be successful at small sizes at the running back position, but he's like 5'9" and is not, the heaviest guy on earth. I think his running style reminds me a little bit of David Montgomery, like his ability to just
Yeah.
bounce off of people and frankly, like other guys bouncing off of him. And I, in my head, thought David Montgomery was pretty small, but David Montgomery's like 6 foot 225. He's a big dude, and it's very similar for guys like Saquon Barkley. Like we think of them as smaller guys because they're in the running back position, and obviously they're running behind, in the case of the Eagles and the Lions, these massive offensive linemen, but they're like pretty big. And I'm really interested in what, if Genty does participate in the combine, which I assume he will, what that ends up looking like. Because I could see him perhaps dropping because of, size concerns, which, may not make that big of a difference. As you mentioned, you highlighted some other stats that you like to look at. And I know he had kind of like an all-time broken tackle game against Penn State, but it's just going to be interesting moving forward. I mean, I'm excited to see him in the NFL next year. So let's move on to the game that got postponed, because I think this one's going to be really interesting given what we saw today and the understanding that they will go on to play a Penn State team that seems to be getting hot at the right time, and Drew Aller also seems to be getting hot at the right time, and that's the Notre Dame versus Georgia game. I was in the Chicago area for New Year's talking to some season ticket holders for Notre Dame. My kind of general thought all year is that Notre Dame is one of the most physical teams in the country, and that this is like technically a down year for Georgia, even though they're still very good. And a lot of that probably could be put on Carson Beck's performance, which was kind of all over the place. He won't be playing in this game. What's your general approach to this Notre Dame Georgia game?
Yeah, I mean it'll be a very fun game, I think, to watch tomorrow. And yeah, when I'm looking at this game, the main thing I'm looking at is, since Notre Dame doesn't really pass the ball that often and they're not that good when passing the ball, it's how can Georgia defend them in the run game. And you mentioned that it's been a down year for Georgia standards, and I really think that on defense, where we've seen the main hit is their ability to defend the run this year is just not what it used to be. Like, they don't have the strong defensive tackles, the Jalen Carters, the Jordan Davises that we've become accustomed to in the past couple of years. And so I really think that Notre Dame should be able to run up the middle against them in this game. And the key for Notre Dame is just avoiding third and six plus, just because they don't want to be put into expected drop back situations. And so if they're able to do that in this game, where they're able to run on Georgia's defensive tackles and linebackers, like I think that they should be able to have some success in this matchup.
It's interesting because it's kind of a weakness on strength matchup on both sides of the ball for Georgia, which is why I'm tending to lean Notre Dame when trying to pick out this game. Because on the flip side of the ball, the true strength of the Notre Dame's defense is their defensive backfield. They have Xavier Watts and Ben Morrison back there, who are certified NFL guys, and they'll be coming in with a backup quarterback. I expect them to kind of hit the ground running a little bit more, and similar to what Notre Dame tries to do, try to operate through a more power running game. That's kind of what we saw in the SEC championship. But what are your thoughts on them coming in without Carson Beck as the quarterback? And, using the word consistency is not the one I would use to describe Carson Beck, but at least the consistency of having a quarterback who's played as many games as him. how do you think Notre Dame is going to approach the backup quarterback, and how do you think Georgia may game plan their offense out?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very tough spot for Gunnar Stockton to have to make his first career start in, where you're playing against a Notre Dame pass defense that I think has been the best in the country this season. Like, they have smothered every pass offense that they played, and so I think that they're definitely going, because of just having this week and a half to prep here. I think that they're going to try to be sending all sorts of exotic pressures at Stockton,
Yep.
like really testing out, how experienced he is at reading the field, or reading blitzers. So I'm expecting 5-man pressures, 6-man pressures, stunts, simulated blitzes, like all of that stuff at this guy, just because you really want to see what you have early on in him, and what could affect him later in the game.
Certainly, Tej. Great breakdowns. So before I let you go, we rarely do NCAA lives, and we're typically on the NFL side. So we got to talk a little bit of NFL. What is your most exciting thing that will be coming up in the last games of the year on Sunday in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm more excited or anxious for this game, but it is the Lions Vikings game. Like, I think this is the perfect game to be a neutral observer to. But like, I think it'll be so much fun, because it's on one side of the ball, it's Ben Johnson versus Brian Flores, like the two assistant coaches of the year, with how good the Lions offense has been playing, with how good the Vikings defense has been playing. And like, those two going head to head is going to be such a fun matchup. And then on the other side of the ball, like, it's all about what Sam Darnold we're going to get in this game. Where are we going to get Sam Darnold, who can throw for 275 and 3 touchdowns, and just find Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison downfield all game? Or are we going to get a Sam Darnold that struggles a bit under pressure, or puts the ball into harm's way, trying to make a throw that he's probably too confident in? And so that'll also be something really interesting to watch in this game.
I totally agree. This game is a true gift, because we're seeing two teams at the peak of their powers. I don't know if the Lions are exactly at the peak of their talent powers, given all the injuries on defense, but they're certainly doing something right. They were hanging points left and right on the San Francisco 49ers on Monday. And then we have the Vikings, who are clicking on all cylinders. I thought that their win, which ended up being a slim win against the Packers, but for the grand majority of the game, they were absolutely dominant. Also, it's a rematch of one of the better game, probably the best game of the year, in my opinion, in terms of like the actual quality of play. It came down to maybe 3-4 plays when the Vikings and Lions got together earlier in the year, and it's for a division, and it's for conference seeding and stuff like that. It's probably a peak Week 18 game, especially for probably the two best teams in the NFC certainly right now, and two of the contenders for the Super Bowl as well. Another game I have circled on Saturday is Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. I think, despite this game not having the most the most stakes per se, Cincinnati needs a lot of help to get in the playoffs. At the same time, Pittsburgh is pretty solidly in, and they'll be kind of more adjusting to whatever seeding. I think this is a really big grudge match, and I'm really interested to see if Cincinnati can light up that Pittsburgh defense that has kind of struggled in recent weeks. What do you think about that matchup?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a really good one to mention. Like, I think that one's going to be a lot of fun. I actually do think the stakes are decently high in that game, because the difference for Pittsburgh to have to go at Baltimore versus at Houston is probably like 6 or 7 points to the point spread. Like, that is a massive difference to have to play those two teams next week. So like, I think Pittsburgh will try to be going all out in this game to try to lock up that 5 seed, to make sure that they don't have to go play the Ravens in Baltimore. And then it's just another opportunity to watch the Bengals offense again. Like, this is such a fun offense to watch. Joe Burrow is playing at such a high level. Jamar Chase is gunning for the Triple Crown. The Bengals offense is best when T. Higgins is out there making plays, which he was doing last week. So just another fun opportunity to watch this Bengals offense, if it's the last time that we'll see it this year.
I'm hoping it's not the last time we see it, period. I hope T. Higgins remains in a Bengals jersey, but it would be great to see him with Drake May, or see him with Justin Herbert, or
Yes.
around the league as well, as a true wide receiver one, which I think he is, and the Bengals are are, absolutely happy to have two basically certified wide receiver ones at this point. And Tej, you're my wide receiver one jumping on this live with me today. So the season's coming to an end, and I'm glad that we can still hop on the lives and cover these games. I'm excited for the playoffs and the remainder of some of these college football playoff games as well. So I appreciate you having us, and I appreciate everyone out there listening on your New Year's. Happy New Year's to all of you. He's Tej Seth. I'm Sam Brookhouse signing off from Sumer Sports. Thank you for listening.